So far, nobody's run out and headed for the door, so that's good. Do I need to introduce myself? We haven't been here in a few weeks, and I'm fairly certain nobody has seen me in a tie before. So, anyway, good. Well, one of the things that's lovely about a lectionary is that it collects readings from a variety of our scriptural sources and puts them together, usually with an eye to guiding preachers as to what they might want to say about the readings. And that's certainly true about this week's set of readings, no? If you had to sort of pick a theme from them, what would you choose? Any suggestions?
Healing.
Healing? Okay, sure. Others?
Conversion.
Louder?
Conversion.
Conversion, certainly. Healing, conversion.
Resurrection.
Yes. So healing and conversion and resurrection. And it's interesting how those three main themes kind of come together in the end of the story of Jesus healing the widow's son and Nain. And what I would like to do today is try and pull out for you some of the ways in which those stories go together, or those themes go together, and then set them in a bigger context. Because one of the things about a lectionary is that it's great for people who really know the scripture. But what it's doing otherwise is sort of dipping in and pulling out in a way that sort of tears you away from the context. Imagine some of your favorite books, for instance. What would happen if you only read, say, one page about every 50 in the space of a 300-page book? And that's sort of what a lectionary does. Is it's meant to remind us of what we already know and pull things together. So that's what I'm going to be trying to do with our set of stories for today. And healing and conversion and resurrection. Let me just rehearse for you briefly. So in the Old Testament story from 1 Kings, we have Elijah, the Tishbite, right? Who we all know the story about him and the widow woman who's out collecting sticks, ready to make a meal for herself and her son before they die. And what he does is renew these resources miraculously. She feeds him first, and then herself and her son. And afterwards, that's the context for our story, in which then her son is so ill that he is like to die. The breath goes out of him. And it is then that Elijah steps in, throws himself over the body 3 times in the upper room, and brings him back from the brink. In the Psalm of David, in that lovely Psalm 30, which is even better in a slightly older set of wordings, listen to that. You have brought me up, O Lord, from the dead. You restored my life as I was going down to the grave. Again, a near-death experience that the Lord is saving the person from. If you think about Paul in his letter to the Galatians, he's not talking there, at least at first, not openly, about resurrection. But what he's concerned to do is talk to the church in Galatia, to people there in Asia Minor, and talk to them about what the real gospel is, the true gospel is. And any account of the gospel, the good news, is going to have to at least, if not begin, certainly end with the resurrection of Jesus. And Paul's own reminder of what he had gone through, of his trip on the road to Damascus, that near-death experience of his own, puts us again in mind of the proximity of death, and then the Lord bringing him back. The Lord, and then the man who takes care of him while he mends. And finally, of course, the gospel story, in which Luke tells us about the way in which Jesus raises the son of the widow in Nain, her only son. So in one way or another, all of these stories focus on bringing people back from either death or near death. But underneath them all, I would submit to you, lies some really fundamental differences. And in the course of meditating about these readings over the last week or so, last 2 weeks, some of the questions I ask myself are, okay, is there a difference? Does it matter who is doing the raising? Whether it's Elijah, whether it's Jesus, whether it's the Lord in the psalm. Some of these resurrections are more literal, some of them are more metaphorical, and they occur for differing reasons in different stories. So let me tell you a couple of the things that I've sort of pulled out as I've chewed them over. First of all, in all of these stories, resurrection is not, surprisingly, the main theme of the story. Elijah is hiding in Zarephath, waiting for the Lord to give him the sign that it's time to confront King Ahab about his wickedness. And then the healing of the son there is almost an afterthought in some ways. It happens while he is there. He's staying in her house, but that's not why he's gone to her house. He has not gone there to heal her son. That's what happens while he's there. And she says to him, "Man of God, the implied rebuke, is this the reward I get for my faithfulness? Okay? And what we find is that the healing there is, in some senses, a miracle that does what all miracles do. They confirm the miraculous, magical properties of the healer. They say, this person is blessed with power beyond the ordinary. This person has a special source of power, which in the Judeo-Christian tradition is the Lord. Okay? So that's what his healing there does. In the psalm, it's God, it's the Lord performing the resurrection, the pulling people back from the pit. But notice the way in which it's said in the context. I will exalt you, O Lord, because you have lifted me up and have not let my enemies triumph over me. Here there's a person, a speaker, who says, you have not let my enemies triumph over me. A very different sort of context. Moreover, the speaker, the singer of the psalm, the praiser, reminds God of what God has done for him in the past. This is a standard ancient kind of formula. Reminds the God of what God has done for him in the past. And says, by the way, God, did you think about that if I die, there's a slight problem for you? What's that problem? Nobody's left to worship you. Listen to what this. What profit is there in my blood if I go down to the pit? Will the dust praise you or declare your faithfulness? One of the things that people in antiquity are fond of doing is reminding the gods that if we die out, you're not going to have anybody left to sing your praises. You're not going to have anybody left to pay testament to your greatness. So again there, the resurrection is in some senses not the primary purpose of the psalm. Likewise, in the gospel reading, the Lord has compassion on the widow, but he has not gone there specifically to heal or to raise the woman's son. He happens to see this bier coming out of the city with a dead person on it and has compassion on the widow and brings her son back to life. So in all of these stories, I would submit to you, they're not aimed with setting up the resurrection or the conversion or the healing in them as the be-all and end-all of that particular passage. This happens, but it's not the main reason that passage is there. So, where do we go from there? I would say that there are a couple of things that are worth thinking about. One thing that all of these stories have in common is that life is a good thing. People are healed, people convert, people are brought back to life. So life is a good thing. And this is familiar to us. We all embrace this and we see it. Moreover, God has compassion for us in our suffering and in our nearness to death or our actual deaths. So these are two things that I think are common to all the stories. That life is a good thing and that God has compassion for our suffering. Okay? Another thing that I think comes out of these stories is that we can't earn this kind of redemption. We can't earn this kind of resurrection. Even though a lot of the stories might lead us to think this way, the woman of Zarephath with her great faith, with her willingness to give Elijah the meal and the oil baked into the bread for him, with the pious author of the psalm ready to dedicate his worship to God. And remember, of course,